Are you always coming up with ideas? Do you marvel at successful business owners? Do you hate being told what to do? Ever take things apart just to see how they work? Are you a dreamer? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Entrepreneurial Enclave with Kevin Wortham, the podcast that focuses on building, maintaining, pivoting, planning, and investing in you, the entrepreneur. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Pro Tapes and Specialties is the world leader in tape manufacturing and specialty conversion with over 40 years of experience. In addition to our Pro brand of high-quality specialty adhesive tapes, we provide contract converting services that help improve your profitability, streamline your supply chain, and reduce inventory cost. We offer the most complete range of converting capabilities in the industry, such as cloth tape, double-coated tape, specialty tape, paper tape, masking tape, vinyl tape,
carton sealing tape, adhesive transfer tape, duct tape, foam tape, electrical tape, filament tape, foil tape, reflective tape.
And the tape just keeps on rolling. Visit us online today at www.protapes.com or call us at 800-345-0234. Pro Tapes, it's just how we roll.
Welcome to another fantastic episode of the Entrepreneur Enclave, Life's Coming Attraction. Man, I am so excited and I couldn't be better suited for this interview because this is the beginning of the year and folks are just getting back to work. And so what better way than to have two of these brothers who I know near and dear are going to talk about the not-for-profit world, and we need to hear about that today. So I've got Brother Athan and I got my dear friend, Pastor Sam Atchison. Welcome to the Entrepreneur Enclave, fellas. Talk to me.
Hey, how you doing?
I am doing well, Brother Athan. Pastor Sam, are you there?
Great to hear you. Great to hear you. And Brother Athan Lindsay, man, great to hear you as well.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump right into this. So as we were prepping for this for this conversation, we wanted to talk about the not-for-profit world and how do you think we can make some definite changes. So Pastor Sam, I'm going to let you start. How do we make some definite changes within the not-for-profit world?
That's a very broad question, brother.
Yes, sir. Well, I know you're gonna hone it down for us.
I appreciate your confidence.
Yes.
Well, let me just say that for me, as you know,
yes,
Kevin, for the years that I was in Trenton with you, working with you,
yes.
I worked as president and CEO of Trenton Ecumenical Area Ministry,
yes,
known colloquially as TEAM.
Yes.
And as part of TEAM, TEAM was one of in Mercer County alone, there's something like 3,000 nonprofits.
Yes, it is.
And so, as the head of a very small nonprofit, a faith-based nonprofit that wasn't specifically tied into a denomination or a particular congregation, the challenges, particularly given our focus, because our focus was really looking at, by the time I took over, we sort of narrowed our focus, changed the focus from broad-based kind of let's help out the churches to a kind of focus where we were looking at at that time the gang situation had gotten really bad in Trenton.
Yes.
And we were looking at and the various nonprofits and the churches in particular were trying to grapple with that. And in as much as, I had just come from, working 13 years in the criminal justice system as a chaplain, I felt that, that was an avenue for us to pursue. And so, but it was tough. It's tough because one of the things that happens in the nonprofit world, you're competing. So you got, for example, in Trenton, you've got 3,000, give or take, nonprofits competing for a very limited pot of funding.
Yes.
In Trenton, as you know, a lot of people were looking for they were looking for block grants, trying to get a piece of the federal block grants.
Yes.
That would come through. You had others who had connections with major foundations. And a lot of it had to do with, as George Gallup used to tell me, people don't fund causes, people fund other people. They fund relationships.
Yes.
And so if you were not in a position where you had those kinds of relationships,
yes,
it was really a challenge. And so, for me, working in Trenton, coming out of the criminal justice system, coming out of New Jersey State Prison, I had to work the relationships that I had, which were largely outside the city, and try to bring funding to the city in order to make to our institution, to our organization, in order to address the needs, that we saw were necessary.
Yes.
And so the challenge, as a nonprofit, is really, okay, how do we to just set, the system essentially sets you against others, okay? And what they tell you, what trainers do in training nonprofits on how to deal in this competitive environment is, develop your brand, what makes you different than everybody else, da 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 da. But the culture does not support working together.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so when I get to, I moved in the middle of 2015. I moved down to North Carolina, to Greensboro, North Carolina, and without going into a lot of detail, through a connection that I developed. One of my early connections in Greensboro was a pastor who was on the board of the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. Yes. And being a board member, he was privy to some things that were going on in the community, and particularly some things that Athan was trying to do. And so in the middle of a conversation, I'm in the brother's office. The brother's name is Reverend Odell Cleveland. Yes. I'm in the middle of a conversation with Odell, and he picks up the phone and says, "Excuse me for a moment." He dials Athan's number. Yes. Okay. I don't know what the brother's doing. Okay? he dials Athan's number, and basically says, when we get Athan on the phone, he said, "Look, I can't do this conference, but I've got a brother here that's going to, I can't do the conference that you got set up to go, but I've got this brother who can go in my place." And so he then hands me the phone, and I meet Athan Lindsay, yes, over the phone. And that's really how we begin, because what Athan is doing is, at that time, is he's gotten funding, yes, to help to redefine philanthropy in at-risk communities. Yes. And he's got this whole vision, and he's gotten funding to attend and to send other people to this conference that's in the DC area. Yes. And long story short, I go up with Athan and his wife, and it turns out that Athan and I are finishing each other's sentences, because what Athan's vision is complements what I was trying to do, but I just didn't have capacity to do in Trenton. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. So I guess I'm trying to set the stage for you, brother.
Well,
You have. I just.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to say,
Didn't know when to jump in.
Athan, Pastor Sam is rolling out the red carpet, so we're just going to ask you just jump on the red carpet, do what you do, brother. Welcome to the podcast, man. Take it away,
Kevin,
brother.
and,
Yes.
And I was just getting caught up in hearing all those accolades and saying that, wow, I paid him well no, seriously, Brother Sam, and I just hit it off, really in 2015. And when I say he hit it off, we literally, didn't know each other from Adam, but we hopped in a car and rode up to DC, with my wife and I, and he was in the back seat going to what was then Community Investment Network Conference, which was a conference that I had kind of put together with another brother and I. We had this vision. Really, we both had been working in my career, just for folks who know, 25 plus years working in the other side of the 501c3 tax code. And I like to say that because, we hear nonprofit, the sector, it is an industrial complex piece to it, meaning that we've got those groups that Sam, like what we're doing, and then the other side that is always a mystery to folks, and that's what I was working on. The big part of my career was being a staff person who a program officer to various roles, to now where I'm a vice president here at the Community Foundation for Grants and Community Impact.
Yes.
But that side of the foundation world and how they work, and this conference, Community Investment Network, has just been a vision that Brother Darrell S. and I had put together that grew out of the fact of working for private philanthropy and other foundations. You just see how things are set up, and Sam said something, relationships, there are structural barriers, and what I even say institutional, particularly for communities of color. If people fund who they know in the relationships, right?
Very true.
That means you got to have access.
Yes.
We all can be honest here, and know the history and legacy of communities of color, but particularly Black people. Getting those relationships and having that access to those things, it's hard.
Yes, it is.
It's from behind. So I spent a greater portion of my career being frustrated from the fact that, well, you're always going to have finite resources that you can give. Infinite need, it's just never going to be there. But what really struck me more is just how working with folks doing good work, and when I would hear just something that just set me on a wrong course. I heard a group of, in Birmingham, Alabama, group of grandmothers and aunties running an after-school program. The after-school program, they actually were taking it to another level, to where they started wanting to look at some policy in terms of school suspension and all these other things. And they had been doing a good job doing that work and even raising some money. But when I got there, they said, Mr. Lindsay, if we don't get this grant, we're going to have to stop doing this work. And it just sat wrong with me. And I said, Miss Gray, I'm here because you all are doing good work. And more importantly, you've been raising money and doing things. You have assets. You're putting it. Make a long story short, from that point on, I said, I've had access to this information and how this works. I want to demystify this, but more importantly, we've got to get more of our communities of color to embrace the side to where we become not grant seekers, but grant makers.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And a lot of that, if you look at it, that led to the work I do now and have done, is we have to expand the narrative of philanthropy, but also as we expand that narrative of philanthropy, we also got to take a real critical look about, well, when you have 3,000 nonprofits, in a Trenton area, why do we have so many of our people who limited view and say, I need to go start another nonprofit? But what I've been wanting to try to do is, can we flip this and say, you know what? If there's a local business, Black business community, they're doing some things, why can't we go to them and say, hey, you know, you have a local community foundation, or some of us even have enough wealth or whatever that in our own, why don't we start giving to those nonprofits and become donors? And when you're a donor, you can direct where you want to see your gifts be made or your funds be used.
Yes.
You know, that's changing the power dynamic.
Yes.
You know, that's power. That's a different look. And that's a kind of quick and dirty version of really what I've been doing, and really what it is getting access and being able to see nonprofits, but particularly nonprofits led by Black people, no matter where you are, what foundation, where community, nationally, even in this philanthropic sector, there's inequities.
Yes.
Meaning Black-led organizations, Black-serving organizations, we don't even get probably, I'm going to be generous, even 5% of all grants that come from foundations.
Yeah, I think
Wow.
the last data I saw was like 2%.
Yeah,
What?
2%.
You know, that specifically targets African American communities, and we've got what I think you represent. You know, as vice president of CFGG, I think you represent what 3%. You know, I mean, you as an African American foundation executive, don't you represent something like 3% of the entire philanthropic world?
Yeah, in this field, yeah.
In this field.
It's what I'd say, it's uncharted territory. And really, it's important to have these conversations, because going back to this thing about, if we talk about empowerment, you know, I struggle with this today, and it's been what my career is. Why have we had such a proliferation of nonprofits and starting to go in that? And what I try to help folks understand, it's a tax code status. And all you're doing is starting another business. But you still got to go get these resources.
Yes.
But the real power, and that's why I like to say about the 501c3, well, you know, the real power behind this is, one, you, instead of having to go start up whole new nonprofits, but become a donor, you get your tax benefit, deductions and all that. But more importantly, that's how you shape agendas.
Yes.
When you're a donor. That's how you start. We start changing this dynamic in this conversation.
Yes.
When we start having more Black folks as donors,
Yes.
it puts you into this world of with the foundations. So
Yes.
those are new relationships that people start talking. Well, if you're funding this, then why aren't you funding that, or come along with us? That's the only way we're going to, in my opinion, going to be able to change some of these dynamics that take place in the nonprofit sector. But more importantly, what I'm really excited about right now is telling and preaching on what I call the gospel of Black philanthropy, but also with that gospel is we deserve to have philanthropic legacies too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not anything that is new to us. We've been building on and have a rich legacy of philanthropy going back since it's as simple as when we were in slavery, to where someone took care of somebody's family and was sold off, to where we had mutual aid societies, from burying people to taking care of folks. We've always been givers.
Through the Black church?
Through the Black church. And all I'm saying is that to get into this world, and we have to get folks in this philanthropy so we can move from charity, but really start understanding that philanthropy has been another way to do social control, do policy. It's all that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In a bag of chips. And all I'm just saying is that let's flip the script and let's start looking at this as donors.
Mm-hmm.
As donors. to me, that's the only way we're going to really start getting at this philanthropy when we have such a proliferation where we, in my opinion, we've just been stuck on the demand side.
Yes.
The power and the creativity is on the supply side.
Yes.
That make it that simple for our folks. But also, we're leaving too much money on the table by not taking advantage of the tax deductions, the tax benefits. Believe me, with tax policy, you better believe the changes that will be made in tax codes is always going to benefit those who are utilizing philanthropy to reduce their taxable income. You can count on that.
Yes. Now, one of the things I find interesting, and my mind is moving. I think key to all and everything that you've said thus far is how do we change the paradigm and empower everyone to understand that simple message that you just shared? How do we change that paradigm shift? How do we do that? That's so simple. How do we change that?
Well, at the risk of, I want people to understand, and this is something I'm just not pontificating on, but I've taken a risk, and what I've done here is what I said, did educating our community about this.
Yes.
But more importantly, what I've done is just done basically some organizing, community organizing Black people around their money, and started and taking advantage of the opportunities of a community foundation
Yes.
that every community typically has, and start talking to us about as being donors
Yes.
and utilizing these tools. And we're creating an endowed fund called the Big Equity Fund.
Okay.
What we like to call affectionately the Big Equity Fund, but it stands for the Black Investments in Greensboro Equity Fund. And what this is, and this is transformative in the sense that I've convinced and had great leadership here of Black people, Black donors, who have said, we need to have something in place. And more importantly, let's take advantage of what our community foundation is. We don't have to go start a whole nonprofit, but we're going to pool our money. We're going to create an endowed fund. And for those who aren't familiar with an endowed fund, it's basically a fund like it's invested like your 401(k) and all that things. It's going to generate money off the principal. It's going to live in perpetuity. That's my big Davidson College fancy word. It's going to be here after us.
Yes.
And it will grow with compounding interest over time. But more importantly, it's people will focus on the money, but it's a paradigm shift where we are saying that as Black people, we can come together and solve our problems. But more importantly, we can't wait for anybody.
Yeah.
We can't wait for anybody to fund the Black-led nonprofits or to lead on the issues that are important to us, where you see so many foundations and all these things going out and doing it. All I'm trying to do is saying we're creating essentially a community foundation, a fund, using the infrastructure of our local community foundation so we can lead and support and address inequities that Black people face, from small businesses to health disparities to educational disparities. But more importantly, we're investing in our future's generations.
What's
so
interesting?
They will have a tool.
What's interesting was, as we were prepping for this, there were two local businesses in Trenton that I'm pretty familiar with, and I had suggested this idea to them, and they loved it. And as I was sharing with you, in both of these local restaurants, Black folks, we spend a ton of money, but at the same time, all we get from their service, although the service is wonderful, we just get service. But what would it look like if they would agree to set aside a small percentage of their sales or a small percentage of their profit into a donor advised fund that they in turn could maybe select folks from their community or folks from their clientele or their restaurant participation to help advise them as to how this fund should be doled out to the community. What would that look like? That's like really empowering. you are participating in the restaurant business, but then on the back end, you get to change the dynamics of your own community. I love it. So, and the concept is so simple, but we've got to change it because, again, you know, we often look at the black community and we say, man, the black community is poor. Well, it depends on the sunglasses or the eyeglasses to which you look through it at. You know, I mean, because
exactly.
So if we change your shift, your perspective as to how you look at the black community, we are rich, we are wealthy.
The black community generates what annually now in excess of $1 trillion.
Absolutely,
okay?
Yeah.
That's not poor.
Not poor at all.
You know, but how do we, you know, again, how do we invest it? You know, how do we look at, you know, what are our priorities?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You know, what are our priorities? And, you know, as Athan is saying, you know, we can't wait, you know, for others, you know, to make investments in our community that we're not willing to invest. And see, I think, you know, as a pastor, and there's one, you know, who's worked, you know, in the criminal justice system, I think of people who are dying. Okay, I really think of people, you know, in terms of people dying. And, you know, when, you know, while we're sitting around talking a good game, but not doing, you know, doing what needs to be done,
yes.
People are dying.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Brother Sam touched on something in YouTube, Kevin, that, you know, everybody's going to get fixated on the big equity fund. Our goal is we want to raise $3 million.
Yes.
For this endowed fund. Got to give the plug, bigequityfund.org. Look it up. I'm a fundraiser. Go in, check it out. We take your gifts. You can do it, whatever. But more importantly, what we're really doing is talking about we have assets.
Mm-hmm.
We
yes.
have assets, and what's so empowering about that? When you have assets, it gives you options.
Yes.
To be adaptive, but also what's powerful about what we're trying to do when we start looking at our assets, you start thinking about our legacies.
Yes.
We have legacies. Take those folks you talk to about in the restaurant industry, the businesses. Generally, if you've done well in an industry or something, the community has been good to you, people want to give back.
Yes.
And create that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Philanthropy allows you to do all of that, but your mindset changes and you're thinking about legacies, and now you're getting into about building a better community.
Yes.
And my work really, that's what it's about at the core. And just to make this to be so real and relevant is that what's been most fascinating about the Big Equity Fund and what we've been doing, and we're based in Greensboro, North Carolina. So, you know, we do that race thing like the rest of America. We might just do it a little bit more peculiar.
Yeah.
But this has been something since we've led with it, and we did this in a pandemic. And we've been able to do 1.5 million without having any in-person fundraising events. But more importantly, we've had an outpouring from other folks in our community, white, Jewish, people who get it and said, one, we were waiting for something like this for Black people to lead.
Thank you.
So we can join with them. But
Wow.
also, they got the understanding. They know what having an endowment is and legacy.
They've been doing it for years.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's what I mean about when I said changing this paradigm. And what you found out is that now people who are already doing it, it's a different conversation.
Yes.
That now people are talking about partnering. We now are in the center and in the room of conversations about community development. What is the Big Equity Fund going to do? We're already having some conversations with some white donors who are with equity and who are asking us, how can we leverage what you all are doing with our giving?
Yes.
I'm gonna stop right there before I get get too excited.
No, this is good. And so as you guys are talking, I'm listening, and I'm always perplexed at, and Pastor Sam can help me out. At one point, there was this huge movement towards churches starting CDCs.
Right.
But again, the CDC still had to function by someone writing a grant to receive money.
And that's why a lot of them were set up. That's
Yeah.
why, particularly with doing the faith-based initiative, in the beginning of the faith-based initiative, 2000, 2001, that, when there was this whole issue of, it actually began, in around 1996, when there was the, they were looking at the idea of charitable choice.
Yes.
Okay, the notion of charitable choice, which when they struck down AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, which was the classic welfare that you and I, grew up knowing about.
Yes.
When they struck that down, and under the guise of welfare reform, they adopted what was known as the Ashcroft Amendment, who at the time, Senator John Ashcroft, who eventually became Attorney General under George W. Bush. The Ashcroft Amendment introduced the idea of charitable choice, okay? Giving churches and other faith-based nonprofits the opportunity to compete for public funds to address issues going on in their communities.
Yes.
Okay. And so what happened is a lot. But again, it was the usual suspect.
Yeah.
Those who had, them that has get, them that has, that don't have,
Yeah.
If you're a big dog,
Yeah.
it's fine. If you're not a big dog, you sit on the you sit on the porch and bark.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what happened. It was the usual suspects, and so you had all of these churches developing community development, corporations, for the purposes of getting and receiving grants to address issues. And what was interesting is they weren't necessarily the people who were most equipped to get the funding because of relationships, were not necessarily the people who were the best equipped to do the work on the ground.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So for example, and I'll give you an example that you know well. In Trenton, Kevin, you've got Fathers and Men,
Yes.
United for Better Trenton.
Yes.
You've got the work of Men for Hope,
Yes.
with Pastor Calvin Baldwin.
My man.
These people know how to do the work,
Yes.
okay, on the ground,
Yes.
okay, to make the difference. But they're not necessarily well funded,
Mm-hmm.
okay? They're not in the position, they're not professional fundraisers. They take, in the case of Pastor Baldwin, he's a businessman
Mm-hmm.
who's doing, didn't set up an endowed fund, but he runs the ministry, out of the profits, of his business.
Of his business, which
He
I
runs
love.
that ministry.
Which I love.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because they're so vested in what they do, because, in the case of Pastor Baldwin, and I'm not speaking out of school because this is part of his testimony. This is a brother who spent a number of years in the criminal justice system,
Mm-hmm.
on the other side of the walls. And you got other people, who are part of that ministry who have that same experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're pouring in, what they talked about in community investment network. They talked about time, talent, and treasure. Well, that's
Yes.
exactly what Pastor Baldwin and those who are working with him
Mm-hmm.
in Men for Hope are doing. Very similar to, again, Fathers and Men,
Mm-hmm.
doing a similar kind of thing. Being there, when family members, when people have lost family members through, gang violence.
Yes.
They're there. Ministering to these people, raising funds, doing backpacks for kids for back to school, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing these things, out of pocket. They really don't have the kind, at least when I was there, they really didn't have a fundraising apparatus per se. They certainly did not have foundation support.
Mm-hmm.
They were just doing what they did, with what they had and making it work.
Absolutely.
Okay. What Trenton, what Athan is talking about, takes it to a whole other level with the big investment fund.
Yes.
that takes it to a whole other level.
Yes.
And I want to be real specific about what that level is. And the level is that we gotta be able to get to the table and decide where the decisions are being made, and so we can be there. One of the avenues to get there is when you're a donor, and we can't get caught up in worrying about how big it is. It's about when the community foundation sends out the list for volunteers or whomever. Some of the first people we pull from are donors who have donor advised funds.
Mm-hmm.
Full disclosure, donor advised fund, you can open that for $10,000 or whatever. And when I say we got to get folks to the table, we also got to get us comfortable with participating in philanthropic giving.
Yeah.
And what I mean comfortable about that, we got to make that sacrifice. And even not only sacrifice, we have to be willing to become educated. And also, when I say educated about the tool, but also we have to change and modify, what I like to say, the behavior, to where instead of you writing a check here and there, what you might want to do is, it's essentially like this, pay yourself first, use that fund, and then you can be strategic in your giving but wherever you are, but more importantly, you now start being a part of an infrastructure to be able to support the groups like Sam pointed out.
Yes.
We've got some folks who are out here doing the work and on the ground, and usually how it happens is if we can get more of our folks who, instead of starting another nonprofit to compete with somebody else doing the same work, we start holding opportunities where we're creating the funds, and we fund them directly ourselves. But more importantly, you start leveraging. You start creating that space to where we have people, if we're honest, some folks have never been across the track into those communities.
Yes.
But when you come together at that community foundation, they're like, oh, I didn't know that was there.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, yeah, that's what it is. That's just what I'm a donor. And you bring that to those tables, decision-making tables. That's the only way, well, not the only way, but to me, that's the most powerful and effective way to where we can start really changing the flow of some of these resources, but also creating the access. And I'll be the first to tell you, we have to be multifaceted and multidimensional in our approaches.
Absolutely.
So
what feels good on this end, and I'm starting to feel goosebumps, is what would it look like? What would it feel like to walk through the doors as a donor as opposed to a potential recipient? Your walk is totally different when you're walking through with the possibility of donating and changing the mindset, or walking through with your hand out saying, I hope that you can help me. And so I like this, and I'm thinking if we can start small and see small local businesses embrace this new concept, I think we can change many communities overnight, brother. How do we get the word out? How do we get more of this word out?
What I would encourage folks to do is, wherever you are with your local community foundation, contact them. And as simple as donor services, and say, hey, here's what we're interested in. And I'm going to tell you, when Black folks are starting to talk about wanting to learn more and invite them out as donors, those calls get returned.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that, and I like to start locally. But also, like I said, I encourage folks to, right now, look up, if you put in anything about like Black philanthropy or collective giving, it's there. People can reach out to me as well at the Community Foundation, Greater Greensboro. I'm sure you'll have my information later. But also, the first thing that I tell folks to do is Kevin, what you keep alluding to is start organizing.
Yes.
Together.
Yes.
And I say organizing together because what's unique about our giving is, culturally, we're going to do things collectively.
Yes.
And, that helps the risk. And that's just building the community. But also some of it is that, the way philanthropy works, it's so individualized and about wealth. Sometimes we feel like, my little penny ain't going to matter much and we'll diminish our resources.
Mm-hmm.
So I say start talking together and
Mm-hmm.
pooling it
Mm-hmm.
and doing it, especially with folks that you trust.
Yes.
It's as simple as, like I said, it's something Sam had talked about. Everybody doesn't have to start out at a big equity fund trying to do an endowed thing, but it's something just what we call giving circles.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You're coming together and pooling it and say, you can go in and say, hey, we're a group of folks that we want to do collective giving. What's the minimum to open a donor advised fund here? And we want to just pool our money together and put it in there
Mm-hmm.
and make some grants.
Mm-hmm.
Or just start learning, inquiring about what is this philanthropy thing about. One of the things I would encourage folks to do is really, really start asking even your if you use a CPA or tax planning, start asking them about your charitable giving options.
Yes.
A lot of times it's not, we don't think about it. Or even in our advisors, start asking them about you want to do more of your charitable giving and some of your charitable giving options. There's the tax benefits to it. But it also starts opening the conversation about, my assets and what I want to do with those things to create a legacy.
I like that.
Let me just add this.
Yeah. Go ahead, Pastor.
The thing for me, when I first moved, again, from Trenton to Greensboro, and I was doing research. I had gotten a grant, and I was doing research on the whole issue of looking at the role of the church in police community relations, and how do we address particular issues in our community.
Yes.
And that was the context within which actually I met Athan. The thing that I understood, and I was coming again from the recipient side, basically the wannabe recipient side, scrambling, because let's face it, through the work that you were doing at MOB,
yes,
minding our business, you helped us, you helped us out immeasurably in terms of our EYO program, our Empowering Youth Options program.
Yes.
So I'm used to, we were struggling, trying to get whatever resources we could, manpower, finances, whatever. But I had this idea of wanting, and in some cases providing, we did provide small grants to local churches, for their youth outreach programs. We provided some small funding for, particularly around the Thanksgiving holiday, for food banks and things of that nature. So I had that vision, but it was in talking to Athan, that he actually gave me language.
Got you.
For what it was that I was, what it was that I was trying to do.
Yes.
And I think for me in this whole process, and I've been down here now 6 years, and, the educational process has been so important. Our community needs to be educated.
Yes.
That's one thing that Athan, quite frankly, was very good at. That was his focus for so many years, and it's still his focus. But he's thankfully he's gotten to the point where they've been able to launch the big equity fund. But so for so many years, my first 4 or 5 years down here, he was involved in holding events through the community foundation to educate communities of color, and particularly, again, the African American community. And because we're so used to being on the recipient side, it's going to take a lot, of education for us to get it. We need to get that ball rolling in our community through education.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
if I can add,
well, let me just add this. We just need to make information more accessible, right? And that needs to be intertwined through every conversation that we have. I just want to share this idea. What would it look like, right, if the churches were to set aside a small portion of their own givings
mm-hmm.
and give unto themselves, as opposed to seeking other folks to give to them, but they're giving unto themselves? What would that look like? Because some of these churches do have the ability to set aside, 1%, 2%, 3% of their annual tithing, and it may not be a lot, but it would be a start, right? And then coupled with some of the local businesses that surround that particular church, man, that could be a nice little donation that would continue to enhance their own ministry. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking like you guys are thinking, but continue, Athan, please.
And quite honestly, and this is what I want to be careful when I get into these conversations is I don't want to diminish what we're not doing, because I said we're already doing.
Yes,
exactly.
We just need to figure out more effective ways to do it betterly, but also strategic. Mm-hmm. And part of even being a strategic is, one, being educated about it, but also being real clear about, like, Sam talked about the churches going out and starting the CDCs and doing that. Great. But, what would be even more fascinating and incredible is that if you pooled your money together, they even had to open up a nonprofit per se. But what if you said, what we want to do is go out and figure out ways to get the general contractors and employ more Black contractors to be able to do this work. And that's what we want to drive. You start there, and then you start partnering up with other donors, but also other institutions in this nonprofit tax code around CDFIs. A lot of times, what's keeping Black businesses and even the contractors to do this type of work from really, the expertise is there, but maybe we start using your money with your banks that are holding your money to say, hey, we need to be able to do the guarantees for these contractors so they can grow, start thinking like that. That's a different way of being philanthropic and very strategic.
Yes.
And leveraging that.
Yes.
I hope I didn't get confusing on that. I'm just trying to say that we gotta become informed and understand that, as Sam and I talk always, and I feel comfortable with this, there's a game that's being played with us around this nonprofit industrial complex.
Absolutely.
Industrial complex, because we can end up going after these grants, like you said. The churches were started up, and I always put this to people. Do you think the tax code status and charitable giving was designed for the benefit of the nonprofits or for the donors?
For the donor.
Then if that's the case, then that's why I always tell people, if you don't do anything or give anything to me, you need to at least come and find out about that and look at that.
Yeah.
And ask this number one question. why have our communities not been told this information?
Yeah. Now the interesting thing, and this might require a whole nother time on the podcast. But that's just the infrastructure itself in terms of philanthropic, right? A lot of the not-for-profits, right? Because there are so many, some of them can barely stay afloat. And when we do write a grant for 5, 10, 15, 25,000, it might be 90% of that dollar grant has to go towards the program itself. But then how do I employ the executive director? How do I keep the lights on? How do I pay for a new fax machine or computer equipment? So that's a whole nother dynamic in and of itself too that we need to address, right? So
no question. This is just introductory, brother.
Yeah, we may have to come. We're obviously going to have to come back for this one again.
Yeah. Well, I know as we get closer to time, why this is so important, and I always like to talk about the assets and what this is about. A couple years ago, Kellogg Foundation and Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors did a research, and it came down to blacks give 25% of their income annually, regardless of where you are, your class. Nearly 2/3 of African American households, they donate to organizations to a total of $11 billion.
Wow.
$11 billion. That's just our charitable giving.
Wow.
So it's there.
Mm-hmm.
The question becomes, how do we become strategic with that $11 billion to where we can drive and we can support the nonprofits that are doing the good work, or even if they aren't doing good work, we can say, we're going to help you get your capacity there.
Exactly.
We can lead and focus on that.
Or
that's why my point is just saying the assets are there.
Or let's say to them, you don't need to be in the not-for-profit world. Why don't you consider collaborating? Because again, we've got a lot. So we also need the mindset. We also need the speaking voice of someone to say, listen, you've got a compassionate idea, a passionate idea. Why don't we just align you with this other organization that seems to be much stronger than you, and you guys collaborate? So we have to do that as well. But the other thing I want to get back to is, you said $11 billion, right?
Yep.
It's
interesting. That study's at least 4 years old.
Okay. It's interesting when it comes to, say, the annual salary of some of our well-known athletes, we know that like it's our own salary. We can tell you emphatically he made $200 million this year. But see, that information about how strong the philanthropic dollar is for the black community, we don't share that. We don't know that. How do we get that level of information out? Right. I mean, there's certain information in the black community that we walk around with. It's just standard knowledge that everybody knows how much LeBron James makes a year. But the information that you just shared with me today, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And what I wanted to do with my whole side with the athlete or the celebrity, what I call it the celebrity dilemma,
yes,
is that we look to them, not to let them off the hook. They're doing their part. But coming back to it, it's $11 billion in charitable giving. So guess what? It's more than even LeBron can do, or some of those folks.
Absolutely.
And that's the part, I got, like you said, that information. We have to be disciplined, and the older I get, I start understanding what this old head told me. He said, and I'm sure y'all heard this before, if there's anything you don't want a black man to know about that's worth having, put it in a book.
Put it in the book.
Right?
Yes, sir.
But I like to advance that, and I like to look forward, and I just started saying that I changed that, and we need to just start asking ourselves and looking at, one, what, especially when it comes to this 501c3 piece, that means it's accessible to all of us.
Absolutely.
But we got to start asking the questions, and I think what we have to be strong and be real clear about, and I'm real clear about my work, even with the Big Equity Fund, is that we have to make do with what we have, and that's okay, and we build off that legacy. And a lot of times what we're just trying to do, the most powerful thing, like you said, is the information and the knowledge. And a lot of times we're talking about, in a lot of cases, $10,000, $25,000 consistently to a nonprofit for general operating can make a heck of a difference.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It would have made a heck of a difference for teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But part of what all I'm just saying is that we have to not get so caught up in thinking about what somebody else has got and what they're doing. Let's start and figuring out, well, what can we do with what we have and what we have control over, and just start doing. The only thing that holds us back on this work is when we trust each other enough to do it. But more importantly, will we trust someone like me or some other professionals in this field of philanthropy to pick up the phone and have this type of conversation?
Yes.
And I say that talking about the athletes, that triggered it, because when I look at a lot of the athletes, when a lot of them start their foundations and do these things, it's who's getting them the information and access to them.
Yes.
And a lot of times for us, we're like, they're professionals in this field that we can help you. And I'll say that to even your listeners. They're professionals in this work that can help you.
Yes. Yes. Wow.
Who look like you, but more importantly, have a shared lived experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the key. That's the key. Gentlemen, I think that's a good note to not end on, but that's a good note to take a break on. And we're certainly going to come back, and have multiple conversations and have multiple episodes on this subject matter. You guys are just fantastic. You guys are my brothers in the struggle. And I just thank you for being a part of the podcast today and sharing your wonderful information. So let's stay connected and let's keep putting the information out there, and we're going to connect real soon again. Thanks you guys.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. What'd you say, Pastor? Amen?
Amen.
Amen. I'm going to talk to you guys soon. You guys be well.
All right, Liz.
All right,
take care. God bless.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That concludes another episode of The Entrepreneurial Enclave with Kevin Wortham, the podcast that focuses on building, maintaining, pivoting, planning, and investing in you, the entrepreneur. We hope you found this episode informative and enlightening. We look forward to you joining us for our next one. Until next time.